I want to introduce you to Carolyn Cranwell. Carolyn is a local author from Adelaide, lawyer and senior transport security advisor for the government, a former dental nurse and hygienist. She's had 18 years' experience as an Alzheimer's carer, raising awareness of the challenges and impact that long-term Alzheimer's caring has on families. She's determined to reduce the stigma associated with Alzheimer's disease in Australia and beyond. She's spent 15 years working in various public service roles, and she is the author of Navigating Alzheimer's. Please welcome her. Now, Carolyn, the first thing you have to learn as a new author is to show everybody the cover of the book. That's what it looks like, okay? So when did you realise something was wrong with your husband, Richard?
Well, first reports came... We're not working?
Yeah.
Let's see if I can...
How's the sound?
Hello?
Try now.
Hello?
Yes, go on.
Hello? Okay.
Go.
Okay, right.
When did you first realise?
The first reports started coming home from our business, from the staff, that Richard was having trouble in normal office procedures and things. And at home he was just a little bit forgetful and things were happening. He would say, pass me the tool, if he meant the pen, or he would substitute other words. And after a while, he would also, when he set out for work for the day, he would, I'd hear the brakes on the driveway and realise he'd forgotten something. So I was just practising my computer skills.
Yeah, you said in your book you kept coming home and you'd forgotten something. So in the end you made a list of things.
I made Richard's checklist, and it was just, you know, it was a bit of fun with the kids, but it was actually quite serious now. I realise, looking back, he really needed that checklist.
Well, he was a healthy man. He was in his mid-50s. You were married 32 years.
Yes.
I think you first noticed the signs in 1997, but it was 2003 before you got a diagnosis.
Absolutely, and part of the problem was getting Richard to accept the fact that he needed to go to the doctor.
And, you know, what was it like when it was diagnosed for the two of you? How did you feel?
A little bit, it might sound a bit strange, but we actually felt a little bit relieved. Is that not working?
We just need to move the pills. Yeah.
Sorry.
No, just talk up a bit.
All right.
So you felt a bit relieved? I thought, from reading your book, I thought you sort of both ignored it a bit to begin with.
Well, partly denial, partly shock, and partly we didn't know what to do or where to go. And so we just, the day that we got the diagnosis, I thought, well, what do? We go home now, and we were renovating a house at the time and we had a steam gun. So we started stripping wallpaper off the walls, and then the next day we went back to work. We weren't quite sure what to do.
And were you frightened?
Shocked, frightened, a little bit relieved in that we actually had a diagnosis and we were in the hands of a specialist, and a bit confused.
But you said again in your book, you said you thought you'd go and bone up about it, you'd go and get a book, you'd find out what it was all about. And you set off and you did that.
Yes.
That's a slab of beer for everybody. Yeah, get that person, someone. I'm sorry I interrupted you, but I was thinking of raising money for Alzheimer's.
I didn't quite know what to do, and so I said, well, don't worry about it, darling. You're a long way off. I'll go to the bookstore tomorrow. And so I went down Rundle Mall in my lunch hour and went to Borders Books, no longer there, and looked for a book that I thought might be helpful. But I didn't actually find anything that was helpful. It was actually quite frightening. And but my plan was to go home that night after dinner, and the children were in bed. We'd share a glass of wine and we'd sit down and we'd talk about it. It didn't quite work out that way.
So what did you do?
We just talked about it lightly. Well, I didn't have a reference point. I didn't have a book. And the next day we just went back to work and we continued with our lives as best we could. Richard was still managing. He could still drive. He could still manage the business. It was just little signs and symptoms that showed up from time to time. So it wasn't all the time. He could manage quite well at times, and he also became very good at masking situations.
So when your friends found out eventually, this is you're not alone. That's what
Yes,
this whole
yes.
theme of the month is. You speak about the loneliness. I mean, was coping with that loneliness a difficult thing for you to do? The phone stopped ringing on a Saturday, you said.
Very difficult. Well, things happen very subtly. You don't realise at first, and then you think, oh, we haven't gone out to dinner for 4 weeks or 6 weeks, and then you'd hear of other big parties or barbecues that would go by, and you think, oh, we didn't get an invitation for that, I wonder why. I think a lot of people that we knew were also struggling with the diagnosis.
And then Richard had a heart attack.
He did.
And the phone started ringing again.
That week, from almost silence to quite a bit of activity. Same group of friends, same circle, but everyone felt a lot more comfortable with a heart attack. They knew what options there were, they knew what drugs there were. Some of the men had actually had heart attacks themselves, and so it was very familiar, and so they felt comfortable. And I was quite puzzled at first about what was actually going on, and then I sort of thought, oh, this is like cancer, breast cancer, or it's like diabetes, or heart attack in males. People actually felt comfortable with the topic. And so part of my purpose in writing the book is to make people feel more comfortable with dementia.
Yeah, because you wrote about how you'd see some of his men friends looking at him and sort of thinking, gosh, if this can happen to Richard, it can happen to me.
You would see sort of a veil, like a curtain, coming down, and they would, at that time they would say, great to see you, Carolyn, got to go, I'm off. They would that was at the moment when they realised that if that happened to Richard, that could happen to me. And they just couldn't deal with that thought, particularly as he had been a great sportsman in his youth and been very healthy, non-smoker, no family history, didn't overuse alcohol, nothing. And it frightened them.
I bet it did. How important is a sense of humour when you're a carer, looking after someone with Alzheimer's?
Oh, 110%. It helped us get through many situations. And Richard even still managed to maintain his sense of humour. He would be a bit restless at night while I was cooking the dinner, and so I'd sit him down at the table and say, oh, read me out the headlines. And he struggled a little bit with that, but he would look at the pictures and read, and then he'd wander off again, and then he'd come back again, and then he'd wander off and come back 3 to 5 times every night. And we were on about the 3rd visit back to the table one evening, and he just looked down at the paper, and he looked up at me, and he said, oh, darling, he said, we get quite good value out of the newspaper these days, don't we? And I thought, wow. I thought, oh, shame on me, shame on all of us. If he can, I mean, we did try and keep our sense of humour anyway, but I thought if he can make jokes about that, and I thought that was absolutely wonderful.
Well, your dog, Harry, appreciated him, didn't he?
Harry the Wonder Dog. Yes, Richard would tend to feed Harry before I got home from work.
Yes, but he'd feed the dog the casserole you'd cooked for dinner.
I used to. I tried fighting Alzheimer's, but you just can't outsmart it. I'd plan the menus during the week, I'd shop on the weekend, I bought myself all these Tupperware things and labelled them and all the rest of it, and I'd freeze them, and I thought, wow, this is really organisation here. And then I'd take the dinner out the night before and leave it in the fridge to just defrost gently, all going according to plan. And one night I came home and there's Richard sitting on the couch, because we did have a carer in from 4:30 till 6:30 till I got home from work, and Richard went to the day centre during the daytime. But there was a very contented-looking golden Labrador and Richard, all smiles, and I go to the fridge and I opened the fridge and I'm going, oh, where's the family dinner? And then I worked it out. It was, but that also happened sometimes with leftovers too. Richard, well, it wasn't leftovers, it would be other meals, and Richard would say, oh, that was only leftovers. You didn't want that, did you, darling? I go, no. So we'd just have baked beans on toast, and that's all right. Nobody starved.
Dog put on pounds.
Yeah,
Family got thinner.
The dog ended up at the vet And he was on that size can of Pow, but half a can, and he had to be weighed in like Weight Watchers.
What sort of advice would you give to someone who's taking on a caring role?
Oh, where do I start, Ita? I would think carefully about the way ahead. I would say work out what it is that you want to achieve. In our family, it was to get everybody safely through. We had 2 children. Ainsley was a young teenager. Jack was about 9 or 10 when Richard first started showing symptoms. And my role that I took on was to look after them the best that I could and get us to where we all needed to be. And my view on that was to live the lives we would have lived if Richard hadn't got sick. And so I had that very clear vision in mind. In fact, one night I actually had a dream, and I didn't tell my children about this. I think, oh, Mum's going, you know, she's hallucinating. And but I told them, I have since told them about this dream, and I saw the 4 of us. We were in a little outboard tinny going across the ocean to an island. And I was in the back steering the dinghy, and Richard was sitting on the front bar across the middle, and the children were in the front looking at the island. And that told me that I had to get everybody safely there. And it just went round and round in my head like a sound loop. I must get us safely through. And repeatedly, and I would think of that often from time to time, and that would actually took the focus off me, what I was going through, onto them. And I'm very happy today. Of course, I'm very sad that I lost Richard, but the children got through safely. They're both happy, successful. They're well balanced. They don't have a chip on their shoulder. They don't feel victims. And we did the best that we could for Richard. I wasn't perfect by any means. Being a carer is a very difficult role. You're wearing many hats.
And who looks after the carer?
Well, that's a toughie. Friends, extended family, but to a certain extent, I think the carer is responsible also for looking after themselves.
But didn't the doctor say to you, I can't do anything to save Richard's life, but I can save yours?
She did. At that stage, I was getting very close to burnout, and so then I started seeing her on a regular basis. And yes, she actually told me that I was at greater risk of dying before Richard, that I was heading for a heart attack, a stroke, cancer.
Because you were still working, weren't you?
I worked
so you were working,
full-time.
you were caring, you had all the responsibilities. So when your doctor gave you that ultimatum, what did you do?
I was flabbergasted at first because I was on this treadmill, and I couldn't sort of see how that I could get off. If I'd been standing back objectively looking at someone else, I would have worked out what was going very quickly. But because I was in that picture, it was quite difficult. But I do believe that everyone, and it helps if you do this right up front, has a choice. And that you can either be a victim or you can be a survivor. You know, you can live your life to the fullest and make every moment count. And so that's what we tried to do. And I tried very hard to, for our lives to be the same. And that was a great help to Richard, to see that we were still continuing our lives. And I kept working, and he was, I think, quite proud that I kept working, but I didn't want to pull the children. We had 2 children in private schools, and I thought our family was going through enough of a change already. And so I didn't want to disrupt them and move them.
But you did take some time off.
I did at that time. My doctor said, have you got any sick leave? And I said, oh, I've got buckets of it. You idiot, that's because you never use it. So, so I did take, she said, I want you to stay on leave until Richard actually does go into care. But he'd been home for 12 years at that time.
All right, take me through some of the milestones. Like the day you had to tell Richard he had to give up his driver's licence?
That was a toughie. I actually thought, from my experience in government, where we use third-party endorsement, and I thought, right, the doctor had referred Richard to a specialist driving clinic, and I thought, well, they're the experts, and they can explain it to him fully. The first time we went, he got a very good pass. But 18 months later, after he'd had the heart attack, things weren't so good. And he was very nervous about going for the test, and he even told this story to a friend who tried to help out by taking him for a driving lesson the night before. But I think that just made him even more nervous. And anyway, in the end, the score that he got was one of the lowest scores they ever got at the clinic. He got 12 out of 100. So there's no negotiation there.
How did it affect him, though?
He was angry, fully understandable, and but after he stayed angry for a few days. But I was lucky he was a beautifully gentle man. He wasn't violent or anything. But then he couldn't remember why he was angry and why he was upset. But then he gradually sort of worked it out, and then he started taking matters into his own hands. And when my daughter was home from uni, and Richard decided he would go down to his business and he would take the bus. So we had a few adventures in relation to him taking the bus. He got rescued twice. We had two miracles, I think. The first time he bumped into the partner of one of our shop assistants who had been a carer for years, and Richard had got off the bus in the city. In the previous times he'd been on the bus, he'd just happened to fluke the express bus. So it went straight to the shopping centre where the business was. But this particular time, the bus that he caught didn't, and it got off in the city. And so all the streets that were familiar to him from his childhood were unfamiliar. And then another time, he took the bus and he got off midway between the city and West Lakes, where our business was. And by sheer coincidence, one of our staff members was at her letterbox getting her mail. She was due to start work in about an hour. Richard got off the bus and wandered along the street and saw this lovely lady, Viv, and he said, "Hello, Viv, how are you? What are you doing here?" And so she took him to the business, and they rang me to say that he'd arrived safely. But after that, I thought, this is too risky. We've had 2 miracles. Asking for 3 might be a bit much.
Is this when you made the decision to put him in the nursing home?
No, this was when I asked for help to get him into a day centre.
Right, and was that helpful?
That was extremely helpful. He wasn't very happy at first, but he did very quickly become used to the day centre, and then our lives started to even up a little bit because I went to work, Ainsley went to university, Jack went to school, and Richard went to the day centre. And all of a sudden things started to even up a little bit, and he was happy and he had friends, and admittedly the people he identified with mostly at the day centre were the carers who were about my age at the time.
So take us to the day when you made the decision to put him in the nursing home. What was that like? And what was that like, making that decision for you? Because it must be the toughest decision a carer has to make, one of.
It is a very tough decision, but my doctor, my GP, really spelt out the alternatives to me. And she said, if you don't put Richard into care now, she said, you are, which I just explained, she said, you're at greatest risk here. And so she said, then he could end up anywhere. And I had particularly wanted him to go to the nursing home where the day centre was attached to it, because he knew some of the staff and that was familiar, and we'd driven that way many times. So that was what I was aiming for. That was my goal. That was my island.
So how did you prepare him?
I tried to talk to him about it, but at the stage where he was at in terms of his symptoms, and that he had trouble understanding naturally. And in fact, when he went into respite a couple of years before then, I checked with the admissions nurse how he was going, and she told me an amazing story where she had taken Richard into the room and showed him the light switch and the wardrobe and said, now hang your clothes up, and the suitcase was all open on the bed. And when she came back 20 minutes later, she told me that the suitcase was there, the clothes were all there, the wardrobe doors were open, and Richard was sitting on the floor in the wardrobe, because at that stage in his disease process, he only heard in the wardrobe. And so he thought he was meant to be in the wardrobe. So that's the day I got over the guilt. That's the day I stopped listening to other people. That's the day I made the decision to only listen to his specialist, my GP, and the director of the nursing home. And that actually helped Ita. That removed a lot of the clutter from other people who are often at a distance, wanting to help, but not really familiar with the situation.
I mean, there's some very poignant moments in your book, and I'm sure anyone who's a carer would benefit from it. But, you know, I know a fair bit about Alzheimer's and dementia now, but there was just something in your book that really stuck in my mind. It's funny how the little things do. And you talked about how when he'd go to have a shower, he couldn't really remember how to turn the taps on. So someone would turn them on. But then he'd have the shower and he didn't realise you had to turn them off.
Exactly.
And it's such a basic thing, and you think, gosh, you forget how to do even that.
Yes.
It sort of strikes a chord for some reason.
Wardrobes puzzled him too. He would, at one stage, it was just like a wall. He didn't realise it was a wardrobe. And at other stages, all the doors would be open and all the clothes, I'd find them all on the floor. So there were lots of challenging things in the home, particularly in kitchens and bathrooms where you have a lot of utensils and things.
And so what is life like for you today?
Life today is obviously very different. We all miss Richard tremendously, but I feel content in that the children are living... Sorry.
That's all right. You're among friends. The children don't live at home anymore.
No, they didn't for most of the time when Richard was in care.
And you're still working?
I still work full time, yes. Although I'm cutting back 1 day a week, so I can perhaps do more of this type of work.
The doctor will be pleased.
Yes, she will be. And I'm on her blacklist most of the time, but anyway. Ainsley's living in London and she's a corporate lawyer over there. She's married and happy and she's doing exactly what Richard would have wanted. Jack's back at university, he's up at Bond University, he's finishing off his degree. He's doing exactly what we both wanted as parents. And I have a wonderful network of friends and a few relatives in Adelaide who are supporting me. And I can tell you that this approach of choosing survivorship or being a victim really works because it helped me get through and it helped us all get through. And I think it's very important that you make that decision right from the start. In fact, I'd say it's critical. Realise that the way ahead is going to be tough at times, but if you keep your focus on that, then it really helps. And so I can actually look you in the face today and say that it worked. I'm happy and I'm thrilled to live in Australia in a free country and have friends and a job, and I consider myself truly blessed.
Well, thank you very much for sharing your story with us today. Would you please thank Carolyn? And the book is for sale today. Carolyn will be out the front. She'll be signing the books. And if any of you would like to ask her some advice, I'm sure she'd be only too happy to share her knowledge with you. Thank you again, Carolyn.
Thank you, Ita.